Nutrition Hero Podcast. Igniting both the art and the science of functional medicine. Here's your host, Dr. Brad Watts.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the podcast lab. Dr. Brad Watts here with you as always. Man, I hope this podcast finds you well. I hope it finds you healthy, happy, rested, for crying out loud, and raring to get back into the marketplace and help people. So excited about that. It looks like this is going to be the last 30-day stint, and I highly doubt it's even going to be 30 days. So very excited about that as it comes to the coronavirus lockdown. And today's podcast is a podcast of a different sort. It's one that's going to be talking about some functional medicine conditions, some conditions that you see in the marketplace, 40% of the population, some statistics say. And so we're going to get into that as we go. But first, thank you to all of the new subscribers out there, the people that have been giving us 5-star ratings on iTunes, the people that have been giving us the thumbs up and the subscribe button on YouTube. Thank you for being part of the Nutrition Hero family. We love having you along, and we want to make sure that you share this podcast with your friends, your family. Get as many people as you can speaking the language of functional medicine, because ultimately it's what's going to help. It's what's going to reverse all of this mess that you see right now in modern healthcare. And no doubt our current health situation, the landscape, is a result of a fear-driven, pathology-based mentality. No doubt. And obviously, if you can't see that it doesn't work at this point, I don't know what it's going to take for you. So, all right, if you're a veteran to this podcast, you're somebody that has heard quite a bit about fatty liver changes in the past. You're somebody that is familiar with the mechanisms of insulin resistance, maybe lipogenesis. You're somebody that is maybe serving people that have type 2 diabetes right now, maybe serving people that have autoimmune conditions, obesity, you name it. And so I throw it out there because there's a couple of common threads. There are a couple of common threads in these conditions. And number one, the main thread that is used that will sew all of these together is inflammation. Inflammation. And so this podcast is coming out of a little bit of research I was doing over the last week for a colleague of mine, and helping him solve some cases, and specifically a case that has to deal with fatty liver change, liver injury, unrelated to alcohol. Unrelated. And so some of the things that are a side effect or a concomitant issue with this type of case is weight gain. Weight gain, inability to detox, inability to have clarity of thought. Oftentimes patients can't regulate their blood sugar. Oftentimes they can't regulate their blood pressure. And in almost every case I've ever seen of this condition, patients are left with fatigue. They're left with suboptimal energy transfer from glucose into ATP. And we're going to talk about that today. In every single case of chronic disease, we have to remember that the equation we're dealing with is DNA plus lifestyle. If we look at DNA apart from lifestyle, you're basically waving a white flag and you are a slave to your DNA. I refuse to look at life that way because I understand that our environment is interactive. And I understand that if somebody's drinking a 12-pack of Coke every day compared to somebody that's drinking water every day, you're going to have different outcomes. You could have the same DNA, but you're going to have different outcomes. And, I mean, in 2020, everybody should know this. This is logical at this point. The problem is that a lifestyle associated with fatty liver changes, people are not necessarily digging into this, and that's what we did this week, is we looked to see what mechanism is actually causing this, and how do we live a lifestyle that short-circuits this mechanism. And so we're going to lay this out as we go here. And I hope what it does is it allows you to first be able to identify this pattern in people. And then secondly, you got to short-circuit it. If we can short-circuit the pattern, it gives an opportunity to turn down the expression of this chronic condition. And so really that's where we want to go. So we got two different mechanisms that we're going to be dealing with for non-insulin driven fatty liver disease. And I say non-insulin because really, as you see as we go here, you're going to find that insulin is a fat storing hormone, but it doesn't necessarily drive the fatty liver changes in every single case. There are other ways that the body will start synthesizing fat with our lipogenesis. So let's talk in terms of liver injury versus a alcohol-related fatty liver change, which might be a subtle situation. Liver injury, really what we want to look at is the inflammatory cascades and how they light on fire hepatocytes, and over time, a cell that's been lit on fire with inflammation, ultimately, it's going to get gobbled up. It's going to get gobbled up by things like natural killer cells and your macrophages and all of these vacuums that the immune system possesses in order to control inflammation, in order to control infection and spread from cell to cell of different issues. That's really the result. And so if you look from a histology perspective, if you look at fatty liver changes, you're going to see a transition from a normal healthy hepatocyte into fibrotic changes, into a full-on situation where we have cirrhosis, actual cirrhosis of the liver. And so before we end up in cirrhosis, there's got to be fibrous changes. And so that's what most people that walk into your office are going to have if they have fatty liver changes. They're going to have fibrous changes to hepatocytes that limit their functionality, number one, and number two, their ability to heal. They've turned from a healthy cell membrane situation into a fibrous cell membrane situation, and it's essentially scar tissue is what that's turning into. So from a functional unit into a non-functional unit. So anyway, that's where most of your patients are going to be when they show up with fatty liver disease. So there's this thing called Lps Lipopolysaccharides that we've talked about before. And if you scroll back a couple of months, I'm sure you'll find a podcast about LPS. But LPS I want to revisit real quick, as this is one of the ways that a liver becomes damaged, stressed out, if you will. LPS, remember, triggers inflammatory damage. It triggers a cytokine response. And so I want to lay this out. So if you're listening to this and you have a pen or something like that, write a few things down here. LPS are produced by your gram-negative bacteria in your gut. Everybody produces LPS. The problem is that with a standard American lifestyle with saturated fats and all this stuff, especially trans fats, when we look at the LPS that comes off of bacteria that are exposed to the standard American diet, it creates like a super version of LPS. And LPS in and of itself isn't bad. What happens though is that it crosses the gut barrier into the bloodstream and it creates what we call an endotoxin reaction. This endotoxin reaction is where things start getting real for patients, because LPS in the bloodstream triggers Th1 inflammation, cell-mediated inflammatory response. Remember, cell-mediated inflammation is, or should be, in a normal healthy person, reserved for infection or injury. Like I think I've used in the past, I've used the word picture, like if I sprain my ankle playing basketball, my head doesn't swell up. Right? It's supposed to be localized for tissue injury, cell-mediated inflammatory response. Okay? If there's an infection, maybe it's a virus, yes, I need Th1 activity to get revved up, kill off the virus, at least attenuate it as best it can, and move on. Right? But when we have Th1 activation from a non-injury and non-infection, like pathogenic infection situation showing up, that's a different story. That means it's lifestyle related. That means that LPS, creating an endotoxin reaction, it gets into your bloodstream and it takes, that bloodstream takes LPS systemic, all over. And since every cell in the body is going to respond to NF-kappa beta, because it's its original defense mechanism, creates a wild spot for a lot of patients. So LPS is going to trigger something called a toll-like receptor on the outside of a cell that triggers NF-kappa beta nuclear factor kappa beta, right? And those toll-like receptors are like a light switch. The light switch gets flipped on from outside of the cell as LPS comes into contact with it. NF kappa beta gets activated in the cell, and it creates a cytokine response, which then, because it's a slow roller, starts to build over time, and because those LPS are never controlled, we're just starting the slow burn where the cell becomes inflamed. And over time, as a cell is inflamed, it dies. We have cell death. And this is an actual issue. So this is an actual chemical pathway right now that I want to lay out some of the finer steps in it so that we can see how to get in there and break up this process the best we can. So anyway, LPS, toll-like receptor, NF-kappa beta, cytokine response, inflammatory cell damage. If you can get that flow chart laid out, we can start getting into some of the nitty-gritty. Now, when NF-kappa beta is released from the nucleus and it starts to trigger the cytokine response of the cell itself, there's an enzyme that's required in order for those cytokines to start taking note. We have this thing called aldose reductase. And in the medical literature, it'll just be AR, abbreviated capital A, capital R. Now, all of the research, the papers that I was going through looking for this stuff in the last week or so here, I have included in the show notes. So just take a peek if you want to piece this stuff together in words that are far more complex and much more detailed than what I'm giving you. All right, but LPS, toll-like receptor, NF-kappa beta activity. In order for NF-kappa beta to trigger the cytokine response, aldose reductase is required. Medically speaking, right now, pharmacology is looking for a way to block aldose reductase so that they can turn off that cell inflammatory response mechanism. Okay? Instead of saying, let's stop LPS production, meaning lifestyle, change food, stop eating crappy food, right? Medicine is saying, well, nobody's going to change their lifestyle, so what if we just go in there and we turn off aldose reductase activity? Right? What that means is that we'll have a ton of toll-like receptors triggering NF-kappa beta, but if we just tell NF-kappa beta to chill out, right? If we muzzle NF-kappa beta, then we're not going to have a cytokine response, which means that we don't have the inflammatory damage, which means that patients don't end up with tissue damage. Okay, so it's an interesting thought, and of course it's very like medicine to get in there to block, downregulate, inhibit, decrease function of something in order to protect something downstream. But really what we want to be thinking of as functional medicine providers is how do we stop creating lipopolysaccharides in such a massive format so that our patients can move down the road toward wellness. Okay, so this is the thing that we're working on here. This is the thing. So aldose reductase. It's an enzyme used to convert glucose into fructose as well. Okay, so not only is this enzyme used to make NF-kappa beta trigger the cytokine response, pro-inflammatory response, this enzyme is also used when your body converts glucose into fructose. Remember, glucose to fructose, that sounds familiar. That's the first step in glycolysis. That's interesting. Remember creating pyruvate, pyruvic acid, etc.? We have a pileup of pyruvic acid taking place as part of this. And actually, Google the pictures, glycolysis. Look at the pictures. Let those biochemistry pathways come back to you. They're in there somewhere. You looked at them before. Maybe it was 20 years ago, but you looked at them before. Let it come back to you so you can see what we're talking about here on the map, the biochemistry map. Okay? So now we have this aldose reductase that's responsible for NF-kappa beta triggering a cytokine response, is also responsible for glucose being converted into fructose. Fructose. Often we would refer to fructose as fruit sugar, right? Fructose. Where else do you find fructose? High fructose corn syrup. Think of things like Coke, Mountain Dew. Man, interesting. All right, so we have a connection here between LPS and fructose. So follow me on this little bit of a rabbit trail here. All right, when we have LPS induced hepatocyte damage, that specifically happens because your liver is the filter for your bloodstream. It's the filter. Yes, you have your kidneys as well, but this is a beast filter. Like, it's pretty big compared to your kidneys. And if we have LPS having to go through the liver, specifically, where is a lot of this inflammatory cell membrane damage taking place? The liver. One of the links here in the podcast notes is going to be LPS-induced liver damage. This is so important to be able to identify. Your triglycerides will be normal in an LPS-induced liver situation. Your triglycerides will be normal. Now, maybe your triglycerides are elevated because you're losing weight or because you're eating, too many carbohydrates. But from the perspective of NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, right, you may not have elevated triglycerides, but you do have liver injury. It's coming from your gut. It's coming from your gut. It's coming from LPS-induced hepatocyte damage. Because we're forcing our liver to filter lipopolysaccharides, we're also forcing our liver into a war it will not win over 50 years, over 60 years, over 80 years. It ain't going to happen. All right, so that's one mechanism of LPS-induced hepatocyte damage. Right? It's a non-insulin driven mechanism for the most part, but because those hepatocytes become inflamed, cell membrane breaks down and we get fibrotic changes. It doesn't even have to be fatty liver induced. Like, we're not even talking about accumulation of fat yet. We're talking accumulation of fibrotic changes. Now, what your liver also does a great deal of is filtering blood fats. We talk about triglycerides, we can talk about cholesterol, etc. We make cholesterol there. And so when we have non-functional hepatocytes that are supposed to be filtering blood fat, metabolizing it, right, lipolysis, etc., what do we expect those hepatocytes to do except choke on the fat that they no longer have organelle function to be able to digest? What do we expect? And so just like a dirty dish sponge, you use it long enough, it starts to get clogged with food and it's no longer functional. Same thing with the liver. The liver is no longer able to keep up on detoxification demands because of non-functional hepatocytes. It ends up being clogged. This is an LPS-induced fatty liver. LPS. So remember, LPS triggers toll-like receptors on the outside of a cell, which triggers NF-kappa beta, which causes the cytokine response and inflammatory damage to ensue. Now, we're going to connect this to another portion of, okay, so what if I have fibrotic changes here because of LPS? Where is another way that we're developing fatty liver disease from this? Okay, so remember, NF-kappa beta, in order to trigger the cytokine response, requires aldose reductase. Aldose reductase is an enzyme that is required to convert glucose to fructose, the first step in glycolysis. So you get these patients that maybe they lived through the 90s when soda companies were like on fire, right? This was me. I used to drink Mountain Dew like a crazy man. I just pound it. Then I met my wife and everything got better, right? And this was a situation, though, where high fructose corn syrup, I didn't know anything about it. Even when I was in school, I didn't know anything about it. But I certainly drank a lot. I did know. I guess the one thing I knew about it was that it tasted really good. And so I would drink Mountain Dew and Coke every single restaurant I went to ever. Ever. If you gave me water at a restaurant, I would scoff at you. I would scoff. Who do you think I am drinking water from a restaurant? And that was my lifestyle for quite a long time. Quite a long time. But in researching how the body metabolizes fructose, I remember coming to the realization that my liver was going to be in trouble. Because guess where you metabolize fructose? Your liver. Your liver. So this is one of the main spots, and it's non-insulin dependent. So you can have a normal fasting insulin score, but still have fatty liver changes developing because of a sugar problem. Okay, so this is a non-insulin dependent mechanism. But aldose reductase is required in order to convert glucose into fructose. Why would the body convert glucose into fructose? Right. So remember the old adage that we have on the podcast is that chronic disease is oftentimes a protective mechanism. Well, if my body's not processing glucose effectively because I have insulin resistance, or maybe because I have diabetes that's unrelated to insulin resistance, maybe it's a biotoxin problem. If my body is willing to allow glucose to pass into my urine to get rid of glucose, do you think it's willing to transfer it into a different form of sugar that's readily utilized, metabolized? Highly likely, right? So this is one of the mechanisms. The kidneys will put glucose into the urine to get rid of excess glucose. The liver will flip glucose into fructose in order to get rid of excess glucose. Okay, so if you're a diabetes patient, you have high blood sugar, one of the ways your body tries to manage that high blood sugar is by converting it to fructose. Why? Because fructose can be metabolized without having to require insulin to open up that glucose and oxygen to ATP pathway. Oh, it's super interesting. Okay. Now, fructose is something that will readily drive lipogenesis, though. This is one of the mechanisms to fatty liver changes. Okay, fructose drives lipogenesis. I'm going to say it one more time. Fructose drives lipogenesis. Okay, this is important. You go, well, Dr. Brad, I don't drink high fructose corn syrup. I don't drink any of this stuff. I don't drink Coke anymore. Well, good for you. But if you have lipopolysaccharide problem, right, because your gut barrier is terrible, and we've been funding these gram-negative bacteria to create raging lipopolysaccharide issues, okay, and now we have lipopolysaccharides involved in your bloodstream, you have a fructose problem. Why? It's that little enzyme, right, aldose reductase. Remember, aldose reductase is required for NF-kappa beta to trigger cytokine response in response to lipopolysaccharides. That's happening. Aldose reductase is going to upregulate glucose to fructose conversion in your liver. Upregulated fructose metabolism is going to lead to a decreased ATP balance in your liver, and hepatocytes specifically, decreased energy, which means decreased cell maintenance, which means increased inflammation, increased fatty liver changes, and you show up at the provider's office and they think you're an alcoholic. They think you're an alcoholic because they're looking at liver transaminases, AST, ALT, GGT, that are like 40, 60, 200, right? And you go, I don't drink. No, but what you do is you farm LPS. That LPS gets into the bloodstream. Not only does it directly damage the liver, but it also induces aldose reductase activity, which converts glucose to fructose, which drives lipogenesis. And it's amazing. It's amazing, right? What else would be a reflection of this pathway on a blood chemistry? You might see elevated uric acid. Right? You might see that. You might see bilirubin elevated. Absolutely. You might be intolerant of fatty foods. Might be intolerant because you can't produce bile effectively. Well, where does bile come from? Liver. Right? And if we can't have appropriate liver function because we have so many fibrotic changes, fatty food may not be your friend. So let's zoom out a little bit further and say now this patient has an issue losing weight. Maybe they're trying to lose 30 pounds, okay? And this 30-pound weight loss, it just ain't happening, man. They can restrict calories, not happening. We could be in a situation where they're trying to eat keto or paleo. It ain't happening. And the reason it's not happening is because the body is not processing the trash, fat-soluble trash, all the crap in our environment that we take in. The body's not processing that because the liver has been injured. And so if we can't metabolize, if we can't get rid of, detox this trash, this fat-soluble garbage from our environment, our body's going to hold it in adipocytes, and we're going to have to maintain some level of body fat to dilute all of this fat-soluble garbage. Right, so now we turn into a fat-soluble trash storage facility, just a silo for all of this stuff that my liver's supposed to be getting rid of, but my liver can't because of the LPS-induced damage and then the glucose to fructose conversion that's driving fatty liver changes. Right? And it's a vicious cycle. Now you're not going to stop eating, you're not going to stop breathing, you're not going to stop being in your environment. Right? So you're not going to stop collecting all of this stuff. And so this patient is going to heal to the extent that you can upregulate phase 1, 2, and 3 liver detoxification. This patient's going to heal to the extent that you can get them exposed to infrared sauna. This patient's going to heal to the extent that you can get them to continue to pound the water and avoid the alcohol. This patient's really going to heal to the extent that we can get rid of all of this fat-soluble trash from the inside of their adipocytes. And it's amazing. It's amazing. So one of the things you want to do is obviously control lipopolysaccharides. Binders. Binders are where it's at. I like Binder Pro from Biogenetics. There are a couple of other binders out there that are phenomenal when it comes to the variety of things that they can gather. But really, for LPS, what you're looking for is charcoal. The activated charcoal is where it's at for LPS. That's included in the binder I just mentioned. So that's a cool step in the right direction. Okay. The problem is that you got to use enough binder that it controls LPS, but not so much that it shuts off the plumbing and you can't go to the bathroom. Critical. Absolutely critical. From there, we also want to be able to chill out on the NF-kappa beta situation, which means that we have to use something that ideally has an anti-inflammatory effect in the long run. Now, everybody and their brother is upregulating their immune system right now, trying to fight off COVID-19 situation, coronavirus. And I think that you're going to see a weight gain due to inflammation in this spot for a lot of people. And not everybody understands what it means to upregulate your immune system. And so they're boosting their immune system function for like a month straight at this point, month and a half, I guess, and out of fear. And with a boost in the immune system, you got to pulse it. You got to give the body time to calm back down, let that inflammatory fire dissipate, and then you can rev it back up and then calm it down. Like if you did 2 weeks on, a week off, 2 weeks on, a week off, that's a good pulse so that we can have decent Th1 function and then back it off, let the body recover. So in this spot, though, we want to make sure, right, that we're using something that allows this inflammatory situation to chill out. So control LPS at the outset, heal the gut. We got to heal the gut. L-glutamine, love it. Love it. Heal that gut barrier. Okay, and then I use the stuff from Biotics Research, the L-glutamine, and it's amazing. I think it's amazing anyway. Great results. And then also we want to be thinking about how to turn down the inflammatory cascade, as I was mentioning. And we've got a lot of things for that, like quercetin is a fun one with that. Additionally, we can have resveratrol would be a decent anti-inflammatory from a nutritional perspective that we could use without having to use medication to suppress the immune system altogether. So, and then really it's about making sure you're eating quality food, right? In this instance, you might think about putting a patient on a paleo-style diet so that we're not having a massive overload of fat for fuel, as the body obviously is struggling to process fat. And so just a couple of thoughts along the way. So there's a ton of research out there right now that you can find regarding infrared saunas and their benefit when it comes to moving this detoxification in the right direction. Something to consider there as well. So, all right. Anyway, appreciate you guys listening to the end of this, because this is important mechanism. I'm going to give you the mechanism in 15 seconds once again, okay? But this is important for you to be able to know this, because when you look at somebody on paper and you're like, are they lying to me? Like, are they on a bottle of wine a night? And they're like, no, doc, I quit drinking whiskey 6 months ago. I don't know why my liver is messed up. Right? Is that the situation right now? All right. And this is just another mechanism that can lead to a fatty liver situation through injury. So LPS from gram-negative bacteria in the gut triggers toll-like receptors on the outside of a cell after the LPS has gotten into the bloodstream. Toll-like receptors trigger NF-kappa beta, which then, through aldose reductase, sets off that inflammatory cascade, and we have hepatocyte damage. Additionally, aldose reductase is going to increase the conversion of glucose into fructose, which is going to increase the expenditure for ATP in a hepatocyte, and that's also going to increase fatty liver changes, as fructose will induce lipogenesis. All right. Thank you guys for listening to the podcast today. Stay safe. Blessings on everybody. We'll catch you in 2 weeks.